Okay, so today we're diving into Bitcoin and specifically this really interesting paradox about its success. You constantly hear about Bitcoin's like civil wars in
Well,
the media, right? People predicting it's going to collapse, but somehow the network just it keeps growing. It seems to get stronger.
hmm
Our sources today argue something pretty counterintuitive, that this constant fighting, this acrimony, it's not a bug. It's actually the feature. It's the engine driving its
yeah,
resilience.
exactly. Let's try and unpack that. The main idea is that these internal battles, they act like a kind of social proof of work.
Social proof of work. Okay, explain that.
Well, instead of, just burning electricity, the network uses conflict, basically disagreement and debate, to really stress test ideas and solidify its core principles, its constitution, if you like.
So it forges anti-fragility, that ability to actually get stronger from stress.
Precisely. It thrives on the disorder, in a way.
Okay, so where does all this stress originally come from? What's the root cause?
It seems to stem from an ambiguity right in Satoshi Nakamoto's original white paper. Bitcoin was presented as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. That's the medium of exchange idea, fast payments, MOE.
Right, like digital cash.
But critically, the protocol also has that fixed supply, scarcity,
Hmm.
and that defines it as a store of value, SOV,
Mm.
like digital gold.
And those two things, cash and gold, they pull in different directions.
Fundamentally, yeah. That tension, that's the source of pretty much all the major conflicts, all the trauma.
And it didn't just stay theoretical, did it? This is where it gets really interesting, as you said. It properly exploded between, what, 2015 and 2017?
Oh, yeah. The block size war. That was over the 1 megabyte limit on transaction block size.
Right, so you had factions forming.
Definitely. You had the big blockers,
Ah.
people like Gavin Andreessen, some major mining pools.
What was their goal?
They prioritized scaling on the main chain. They wanted Bitcoin itself to handle way more transactions, be faster, cheaper, really push that MOE, that electronic cash vision.
Compete with Visa, basically.
Sort of, yeah. Even if it meant maybe compromising decentralization a bit.
Okay, and the other side, the small blockers.
Right. That was many of the core developers, lots of longtime users, node operators. They fought hard for decentralization above all else.
Why? What was their argument?
Their argument was, look, if you make the blocks too big, it becomes really expensive and difficult for regular people to run a full node,
Which means?
which means the network centralizes around fewer, more powerful players. And that compromises security, censorship resistance, all the key things that make it a good store of value. So it was this fundamental fight over Bitcoin's identity.
So how did it get resolved? Because it sounds like the big players, the miners, had a lot of power.
They did. But the decisive moment, interestingly, wasn't some corporate backroom deal. It was something called the User-Activated Soft Fork, or UASF.
UASF. Okay, break that down for us. It sounds technical, but seems crucial.
It was pretty radical, actually. It was totally grassroots, bottom up.
How'd it work?
Essentially, a significant group of users and developers signaled that their nodes, the software they run, would simply reject any blocks that didn't adopt certain upgrades, like SegWit, regardless of what the miners wanted.
Wow. So the users basically drew a line in the sand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it worked. It proved that ultimate authority in Bitcoin doesn't rest with the miners, who have the hardware power, or even with corporate agreements like the SegWit 2x attempt later on.
It rests with the economic majority, the people actually using and valuing the coin.
Yes, the individuals, the exchanges, the businesses running full nodes. It was this incredible display of social consensus overriding raw economic hash power.
Okay, so Bitcoin weathered this huge internal crisis. What was the long-term result?
Well, the outcome really solidified Bitcoin's primary narrative. It became much more clearly defined as digital gold, that store of value.
And the cash aspect.
That sort of got sidelined, at least for the main chain. The split that created Bitcoin Cash, BCH, actually helped clarify things. BCH went off to pursue the big block MOE vision.
So BTC could focus.
Exactly. BTC could double down on scarcity, security, decentralization, the SOV properties. And that clarity arguably paved the way for folks like Michael Saylor and eventually the spot ETFs.
That's interesting because you often hear the opposite, right? That all this infighting, the Civil War headlines, must surely scare off serious institutional investors. They want stability, not drama.
Well, yes and no. You could argue the drama isn't just noise, it's actually proof. Proof of life. proof it can't be easily captured or changed by powerful interests.
How so?
Think about institutional due diligence. They need to be sure the protocol's rules, especially the supply cap, can't just be altered by some CEO or government, or even a majority of miners.
And the block size war showed.
It proved very publicly that the network resisted capture attempts by powerful miners and corporate coalitions. That demonstrated resilience. That non-capture quality is incredibly valuable.
So the messy fight was actually a selling point for institutions looking for genuine decentralization.
Precisely. It showed the system worked as designed, that the social consensus layer was supreme. That's a powerful story for long-term value. In this constant debate, it acts like Bitcoin's marketing department.
How does that work?
Every time there's a big argument, it forces the community to get out there and publicly explain and defend Bitcoin's core ideas. Censorship resistance, sound money, whatever the debate is about, it keeps Bitcoin in the conversation.
So even current debates, like the core developers versus, say, Bitcoin knots about filtering ordinals data, that's just the same dynamic playing out.
It's an echo, absolutely. It's often still rooted in that fundamental tension between using the block space for pure value transfer versus other kinds of data or functions. It's the network continuously stress testing itself in public.
Right. So the final takeaway for listeners thinking about this.
I think it's that every single conflict Bitcoin navigates, every public spat it survives, it acts like a public audit, a stress test. It reinforces its resilience.
Yeah.
The Lindy effect, where the longer something survives, the longer it's expected to survive.
And each survive test arguably makes the asset itself more credible, more valuable to long-term holders.
Exactly. It demonstrates robustness.
Which leads to a really provocative final thought then. If centralized systems like banks or tech companies always strive for efficiency, harmony, maybe even secrecy, is constant, messy public disagreement actually the best indicator we have of a truly healthy, functioning, decentralized network? Does quiet harmony maybe imply capture?
That's a fascinating question to ponder, isn't it? What does healthy really look like in a decentralized world? Definitely something for you to think about.